series that we are going to be on for the next couple of weeks. And I pray that even as we go through this, that God is going to speak to us. What we are about as a church is helping you to take the next steps in your walk of faith. Every single one of us has a next step. If you've been born again for 3 months, you have a next step. If you've been born again for 10 years, you have a next step. There's something next that God is calling you towards. All of us have a next step. And this year, we want to help you take the next step. Some of you are in a season where you want to grow in your walk with God in terms of prayer and fasting. We are here to facilitate that for you and to help you make that a possibility. Some of you are in your season of parenting. We have parenting classes as well to help you take that next step in whatever area you are in your life. In business and all these things, there is a next step for you. And as a church, we want to help you take that next step. So even as we look at the life of Abraham, which is what we are going to be spending our time looking at, we want to see some of the steps that God helped him to take as a servant of God. But we want to look at his background, where he's coming from. Look at the history. Look at how he related with his family, with his friends, with the people that God put in charge of him. And so we start on this series this morning, and I'm very, very excited. As you know, it's an opportunity for us to read through the Bible. As a church, we like that, spending time reading through the Word of God. And I'm hoping that in the seasons that I'll be here as a lead pastor, that we will get to do most of the Bible, okay? If not all of the Bible, that we will read different books at different seasons and just get to understand. So for this season, we are going to be in Genesis, beginning mid of chapter 11, all the way to possibly chapter 24 of that book. And we are going to spend most of the time reading those verses. So this morning, we want to look at the background of this man called Abraham. Now, as you know, Abraham is the father of our faith as Christians. But the Muslims as well recognized Abraham as a special figure in their faith, as well as the Jews. They refer to Abraham as the father of their faith. I forgot to mention that Pastor Judy is also a pastor in this church, okay? You guys know Pastor Judy? Pastor Judy, just rise up. I forgot to mention that. I'm sorry. Pastor Judy is one of our pastors here, but she is not on full-time staff. So when she shows up to your house to pray for you, ujue umemtoa kwa kazi nyingine, okay? So she needs to be blessed more because she's not on full-time staff, and yet she serves as a full-time staff here. Thank you so much for that reminder. All right, so we go on. So the background, we want to look at the background of this man called Abraham. So we go to the book of Genesis, chapter number 11. We want to pick it up from verse number 27, just to look at this man and his family. This is what the word of the Lord says. I'll read in the NIV. This is the account of Terah's family line. Genesis 11, 27 downwards. Terah became the father of Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, in the land of his birth. Abraham and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. This is the background of this man called Abraham. Of course, all of us have a background. And some of us spent time over the holidays going back to our roots, where we come from. You know that, they call the place in the back of your ID, the village where you come from, that is where your roots are. And so in this passage, we are given the roots of this man called Abraham. And when you think, okay, it's calling him Abram at this point in time, but we all know it's Abraham, okay? The name will be changed later in Genesis chapter 15 or 17. His name will be changed there. And so as I confuse, just know we are talking about the same person. Abraham is the same person. So as we might expect, this man called Abraham, the man who is responsible for the Christian faith, the man who is responsible for other faith, is a man that you would expect that he would have this background that is a wonderful heritage, especially in the Christian light, that you would expect that this man would have come from a family that prayed, a family that spent their time in the presence of the Lord. But that's not the reality that we learn here. We learn that his father, who was called Terah, was a worshipper of the moon. So he was a heathen. Their home was a place called Ur, which is present-day Iraq. And that's where they lived for most of their life. I mean, that's where Haran lived. Until one day, he packed his family and moved to this city that is called Haran. Now, Haran is present-day Syria, and that's where they settled until Terah died. You can imagine that being a family that, worship, that is into idolatry, that Abraham grew up not knowing Yahweh as his God. He grew up not thinking of a God in heaven. He grew up not imagining that there is any other God but the moon god that they worship. And so this was the background of Abraham. And it's interesting to note that even as we grow older, that our background has an effect on who we are today. Now, another attribute of Abraham that I found interesting was this attribute of loyalty. Abraham was loyal to his father. Let's begin with that. In fact, if you go to the book of Genesis, let me just mention this in passing. Genesis and chapter number 7. Not Genesis, sorry, Acts chapter number 7. Acts chapter number 7, Stephen, okay, in the New Testament is just about to, is standing in front of the priest, and he says these words. He says, then the high priest said, are these things so? And he said, brethren, fathers, listen, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, which is Ur, okay, before he dwelt in Haran, and said to him, get out of your country and from your relatives and come to the land I will show you. So Abraham is in Mesopotamia with his family, and God appeared to him, according to Stephen, and God calls him to move. But when we come to the book of Genesis, that is not recorded. What is recorded is that his father is the one who caused them to move. I don't know if you can see the hand of God here, because it's not Abraham who tells the father, let's move. And Abraham is not called to the land of Haran, yet him and his father move from Ur and move to this place that is called Haran. Okay? And so he was loyal to his father, that he did not question his father. Another thing that we see of Abraham in terms of loyalty is that he was loyal to his departed brother. He took his departed brother's son, who was called Lot, his nephew, he took him under his care. He was faithful to his brother. We see Abraham was faithful to his wife. The Bible tells us that Sarai was childless. In that society, children were everything. If you could not have children in that first world, then you were nothing. Because children gave you security, they gave you protection, they were the heirs of, of your lineage for the years to come. And so Abraham is seen as a loyal man. And this is his background. He's a loyal man, but he's a man who does not know God. He's a man who is a heathen. He's a man who does not understand who this God called Yahweh is. And all of us have backgrounds. all of us come from somewhere. Some of us come from very ordinary backgrounds. Some of us come from outstanding backgrounds. I mean, if you say your third name, then we all like, hey, okay, kumbe we ni dynasty. You know? Some of us come from even a poor background. You know, we grew up poor. And some of us even came from very wealthy background. And then some of us come from a godly heritage, where our grandparents maybe were believers and they passed down their faith to our parents, and we grew up in a Christian home. So we have that as a background. But some of us do not have that. We come from a family that we are the first believers. In fact, some of our family members do not understand. How are you a Christian? How are you a believer? I mean, we did not grow up like this. This is not the way our parents showed us. So how did you end up like this? So the reality is we all have a background. Tell your neighbor, you have a background. And friends, the reality is this, that you cannot do anything about your background. You cannot do anything about where you come from. You cannot change it. You cannot alter it. It is part of who you are. In fact, if there's anything you can do about your background, is learn from it. Learn from how your parents brought you up. Learn from some of the mistakes they did. Learn from all of that. And then decide and think about the kind of background you are going to leave your children. That is the most important thing. It's not about where I come from. It's about what I will leave for my children. What is the heritage that I'm going to leave for my children's children? Can they say one day that we had a grandfather who invested himself in making us know God? You know, the problem is when we talk about background and we talk about heritage, all of us think of how secure we need to leave our children. How much property we need to leave them. I do not want my child to struggle. I do not want my child to go through the problems I went through. Well, you are here, aren't you? I mean, you are here. You went through the problems, and here you are. What made you stand? Is it the values that were instilled in you, or is it the money that you had? What is making you today as a firm person in society? What is making you wake up in the morning when you feel like giving up? What is making you? It is the values that were instilled in you. So stop thinking that you need to be wealthy for you to leave, a good heritage for your children. Well, it's important, but it's not a must, because here you are. Okay? I'm talking to those of us who grew up without stuff. Okay? Here you are. You are standing today. So the background where you come from really does not matter. What matters is what kind of background are you going to leave to your children when your time comes for you to depart this world. So here is Abraham. And his family of origin, as we have seen it, is not a family that knows God. And even in that aspect where, Abraham does not, have a relationship with Jesus. Abraham is this person who is a heathen. Abraham and his family do not know God. Even in that situation, what do we see? We see God calling Abraham. God is calling this man who did not believe in him. God is calling this man who did not know him. And friends, sometimes God calls us not because we come from an extraordinary background. God does not go there looking at your CV. The way as an employer, you look at the best candidate for the job. You look at, huyu amesoma, alisomea shule gani. It's not just amesoma, alisomea shule gani. Kama tunaona huyu ni wa ile university yenye hatujui hata ni initials peke yake, ama hatujui university iko wapi, then we don't even consider them. They look at, okay, what is your work experience? Oh, you finished and you just stayed at home. Then they look at the other. God does not consider you in terms of who you are, in terms of qualifications. And so if you look at Abraham has this background that you cannot even talk about in terms of godly things. Yet God calls him to his kingdom. What an amazing call this is. When you think of this man he's the father of our faith, and he did not have a background as a Christian. You know, when you think of all these other people, you think of David, you think of Samuel, you think of, like, they have a background. They have somewhere, they were brought up. Even when you think of Jesus, he was brought up, being taken to the temple. You know, like, they have some sort of a background. But Abraham has none of that. Yet God calls him to be the father of the faith. So let's see what he does when God calls him. So we're in Genesis chapter number 12. And so the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country, your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And so Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived there. Verse 6 says, and Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Verse 8, from there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. Now, friends, of course, as we look at these verses, these are popular verses that we have read so many times before. If you've been in church even for a moment, you know that this is the great promise that was given to Abraham. And I know that most of the time when we come to church and we talk about Abraham, these are the promises that we want to claim for ourselves. You know, where God says that I will bless you. And you're like, God, the way you blessed Abraham, bless me. Okay? The way you did for Abraham, do for me as well. You know, so this morning, I don't want us to focus on the blessing. I want us to focus on this call that was placed on Abraham. And we see from these verses how the call of God is a personal call. The call of God is always personal. It's always personal. Now, you know, when I talk about the call of God, you are seated there and you're thinking, he's someone niyangu kweli. You're thinking, it's not for you. Well, I came to tell you this morning, and that's why we are preaching through Abraham, that God has called you. The way God called Abraham, a nobody, nothing, no background, no nothing. God has called you. And that's why we are talking about Abraham. Because as we look at his life, I want you to mirror your life to his and see, where is it that my life and Abraham's life kind of, intertwine? How is it that God did for Abraham that he can do for me? Before we claim the blessings, it's easy to claim the blessing. Oh, God, bless me. Have you accepted the call? We want to claim, yes, bless me. Curse those who curse me, Lord. Curse them. Curse them. You have not accepted the call. This blessing is for somebody who has accepted the call of God over their lives. Okay? And that's what I want us to understand and get, that even as you are, as a chef, that God has called you. As an engineer, God has called you. As a student, God has called you. This calling of God is a personal call. What do I mean? It's not a family thing. We see Abraham has this background where his father, his siblings, everyone around him is not a believer. Okay? And yet God picks him out of that space and says, you, I am calling. You, Abraham, I am speaking to you where you are, and I am calling you to be a father of the faith. But at that time, Abraham had no idea what God is calling him to. And yet he accepted the call of God. The call of God is not about you coming from a family where your father was a pastor or your mom was a reverend, and so you qualify to be called by God. No. God can call even somebody who does not have a Christian background. God can call somebody who did not grow up in Sunday school. God can call somebody who even has fallen so many times. And yet God can call them and cause them to do something extraordinary for them. And most of us, when God calls us, the first calling that God makes on our lives is the calling to believe in Him. The calling to say yes to Jesus is a call that God calls you. And I know some of you, when I ask you, how did you give your life to Christ? You say, one day I was just somewhere and in a meeting and I felt the pastor called, asked who is not saved here. And I felt something in my heart. I felt something in me telling me that is you. That is the call of God. He was calling you out of the world of sin. And you thought it was just your heart. That was God speaking to you. Some of you would say, I was in prayer at night, or, I was asleep, and God, I had a voice saying, today is the day to give your life. That was the call of God. And when we look at the Bible, we see God meeting Moses. Moses is there just having his own business, taking care of the sheep. That is you. At your workplace, just going on with your usual business, just there, with your apparatus, just there preparing for that chemistry class, just there preparing, to miss the next client, just there. And the Bible says that God showed up to Moses where he was. And we see the same call, over and over. Saul or Paul, he's on his way to Damascus. He's just, going on his usual business. And that is you. Going on your usual business. And guess what? God shows up and calls Paul. And his life is transformed. I am telling you that the call of God is personal. It's for you. Do never imagine that God just calls, the people who serve in church. Every one of us, the first call that we have to respond to is the call to receive Jesus. And once we do that, then the ball starts rolling. And God is calling us to better, to bigger, to different things, all for His kingdom. So here we are. We find Abraham has been called by God. And he's told, leave everything behind. Leave your family, leave your comfort, leave everything that you know, and go. Go. He's not told go where, he's just told go. Now, let me ask you a question. If God shows up to you tonight and He tells you, tomorrow morning, you and your children pack your bags and get into your car and go. Like, you just be like, definitely it's not God. You're just like, that can't be God. That sounds like confusion. The way we brand those things. God is not a God of confusion. Haizi niambia nitoe watoto shule saizi. No. That is what God told Abraham. Leave. The KJV, King James Version says, Abraham, get thee out. Get out. Leave your things, leave your belongings, and move to the place that I will show you. And if you look at the life of Abraham, it's marked out with go. Where? I'll tell you. And so you start walking. Abraham starts walking with his family. And then he gets to the place, as we have seen in chapter 12. God says, this is the place. This is the place. Some of us this year, God is calling us to things and we want a sign. We want a big billboard that says, stay in Nakuru. This is the Lord. That's not it. Sometimes God just provides you with good friends that you're just like, hey, Manzemi, I'm not living in Nakuru. I found friends. And that is God telling you, this is the place for you to settle. So here is Abraham. Him is living. He's leaving everything, his comfort, his culture, his family, and he's going to a land. If you look at where Iraq is on the map, and I will not use Mesopotamia, I'll use Iraq because that's what you can see on your map today. If you look at where Iraq is, Then you move to Syria, eastern Syria. That's where Haran was. And then eventually you move from there to Jerusalem. You're just like, man, that was some journey. It was not one day. It was not 2 days. It was a long time of trusting God and believing that God has called him. The call of God is personal. It's personal. Once you hear his voice, it's time for you to take action. And God speaks. He speaks, and he is speaking even today. Secondly, the call of God is purposeful. The call of God is purposeful. We see he tells Abraham that I will make you into a great nation. Why? So that you can be a blessing. So that you can be a blessing. There's a purpose. There's a purpose for the call. There's a purpose for the call. Once God calls you and you've said yes to Jesus, that's the first. There's a reason why you have given your life to Jesus. Never imagine that you've given your life to Jesus so that you can go to heaven. Otherwise, the moment you get saved, wewe ndio huyo, umeenda. That's not the reason. God has called you for a purpose. And that is one of the things that you have to wrestle with as you're here on earth, asking God, what is the reason you've called me? Now that, I found myself, I've fallen in love with you, I'm falling in love with you, I just want to worship, I just want to spend my time with other believers. Why have you called me? There has to be a purpose. It's not just to live. It's not just to live and have children and be in relationships and have fun. No, there's something bigger. And this year, I want us to chase that bigger thing, that purpose. Why are we here? It's not just to show up every Sunday, just to go to your office tomorrow and just have another week, just another Monday. There is a purpose, friends, that we have to wrestle with this year. God, why have you called me? Why have you called me? Why have you called me? Why am I born again? There has to be a reason. I'm just not born again. Most of the time we describe Christianity as the things you should not do. Okay? So who's a Christian? A Christian is somebody who does not XYZ. You can feel it. Okay? A Christian is somebody who does not. But who is a Christian? It's somebody who walks by faith, like Abraham. It's somebody who, when God says go, you go. When God calls you, you accept the call that he has placed before you and you walk in that call. So the call of God is purposeful. He tells Abraham, I will make your name great. I will bless you. Now we want this. We want to have great names. We want to be the best. We want to be wealthy. We want to be, we want a great name. We just want those things. But we do not want the so that part. We just want it for the sake of wanting it. But God is saying, that's not the reason I am calling you. I am calling you so that you can be a blessing. And for you, there is a reason why God is calling you. It's called purpose. Purpose. How do you know your purpose? That's a question that I get asked so many times. How do you know your purpose? Your purpose is what makes your heart bleed or cry when you look at the world. What is it? Because the thing that makes you cry when you think of the world, does not make me cry when I think of the world. And it's okay. Some of you, when you think of prostitutes, your heart cries. You're just like, no, it shouldn't exist. There must be another way that I can help these women. And your heart cries. But when I think of that, I feel nothing. And it's okay. What makes my heart cry is believers who do not know the Bible. I'm just like, why are you even a believer? You don't know the Bible? So my heart cries, and my purpose is to simplify the Bible as a teacher of Scripture. And to simplify that when you read it, actually you see it, you're like, okay. My purpose is to raise up the next generation of leaders, guys younger than me, and raise them up and give them opportunity to serve and to exercise their giftings. And that's what I cry about. Because as I grew up in church, nobody gave me opportunity to serve. As a young person in my early 20s, they were just like, wewe, Kazi yako iko huko, beba speakers. Usihubiri, ukubiri ni ya wazee. And I was like, the day I will be a pastor, I'll give young people opportunity to preach and to teach. Because even them, they have a revelation. So what is your purpose? What do you think? When you think of the world, what makes you hurt? And some of you, you're already doing that. But you just don't think that you are living your call. You're imagining that call is something you do on Sunday or something you do at church. Being a doctor is a calling. It's not an easy thing. That's why I can't be a doctor. Why would I be in school for 6 years? Why? You get? Why? Without a break. It's a calling. But you need to see it as a calling. It's not a job. And so as you do that which you are doing, you exercise it as a call. Being a businessman. It's not just anyone who can be a businessman. You think everyone can be a businessman? Emu, give me 1 million shillings and see if I'll be a good businessman. I'm not a good businessman. Being a businessman is a calling. So you have to look at your whole life as a calling. That's where I'm going. Your life is a calling. But are you living it as a calling or it's just a job? It's just So you need to ask yourself, as I do this, how am I impacting humanity? How am I making a difference? How am I changing people's lives? That is what matters. It's not the numbers of money you have in your account. That does not matter. If you die tomorrow, nobody cares. In fact, if you look at the records of banks and the amount of money they collect from just, accounts that are dormant, it's a lot of money. Those people died. Nobody knew what they had. It does not matter. It's the impact that you have through that which God has called you to do. So the call of God is purposeful. It's personal. It's just to you. Usifikirie tumeitwa sote to the same thing. That's why I'm saying the thing that you assume that is so kawaida, it's not. It's uniquely you. The things you like, your background, how you've been created, it's uniquely you. So it's time for you to live your calling. It's personal, it's purposeful. And finally, the call of God is transformational. If you look at the life of Abraham, this man who comes from a heathen background, his family, his father, they did not know God. They had no relationship with him. And God calls him. And the moment God calls him and he says, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. We start to see a transformation happening in his life. Things start changing. His priorities are changing. He's changing who he is. Yes, he's not perfect. I mean, if you just read chapter 12, from verse number 10, he's going down into Egypt and he's going together with his wife and he's like, hey, my wife ni msupu, tukienda huko, say what I'm like, okay? So tukifika huko, we ni sisi yangu, okay? That's what he does. Like, please, useme we ni wife yangu, wataniua. He's not perfect. He's afraid, okay? Then when you think about it, God had called him to Canaan. And he, in these verses we've read, he settles in Canaan. And then there's a famine in Canaan. So he leaves the place where God had called him. And that's what we do sometimes. God calls us to a place and we leave to a different place to look for greener pastures. And that's not the will of God for us. And that is what we see with Abraham. So he's not perfect, but he has said yes to the call. Look at your neighbor. Do they look perfect? Do they look perfect? Acha nikwambie, ni mafuta tu. They are not. They are not. Well, if you're seated with your wife, then she is perfect. But if it's just another person, they are not perfect. Why? Because you are not perfect. But God is not calling you to perfection. He's not calling you to perfection. If he was just calling the perfect people, trust me, I would not be there. I would not be there. But his call is transformational. Once you accept his call over your life, then he begins to transform you from a nobody. Abraham was a nobody. Nobody cared about him. He was a nobody. Yet God called him, and when he said yes, then his life begins to be transformed. He was a heathen, but when he said yes, then he starts walking by faith. You know, this man who did not believe in God, he said yes to the call. Now all he lives with is just faith. He is believing God is calling me, God is leading me, God is guiding me, and all he is living is a life of faith. He was an ordinary man. I don't know if you're ordinary enough for God to use you. I don't know. Are you ordinary enough for God to consider you, to call you, and to send you? Are you? Or do you feel like you are special? Or you need something special? No, you don't. You are ordinary. You know, friends, our president keeps on telling us the way he was, he's a nobody. Now, if we believe him, he's our president today. Yet he was a nobody. You get what I mean? But he believed that, you know what, God has called me to lead Kenya. And he told us, God has called me to lead Kenya. Now, if you believe him or not, it does not matter. Because we really don't know if God really called him. He knows. He knows. And maybe God really called him to lead Kenya because he is the leader we wanted. And here he is leading us just the way we wanted. Just the way we wanted. So he says he comes from an ordinary background. If that's true, then he's a good example for us today. To believe that even us who are seated here today, God can call us. God can call us. And God has called us. And he has called us to do extraordinary things for him this year, 2025. And as we spoke last week, I told you that as you enter this year, you need to enter with high expectation. High expectation of God, but high expectation of yourself. You need to enter and say, 2025, I am going to do bigger things. Hey, you've never seen. And then roll your sleeves. We start by praying and fasting, and then we get to work. Roll our sleeves and say, this year, we are doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the Lord and for his glory. Because God has called us to make a difference. I believe that God has called this church to make a difference in this city. Well, I am not a resident in terms of I was not born in Nakuru. In fact, 3 years ago is when my wife and I moved to Nakuru. Just 3 years ago that we started being pastors here. And we can already sense that there is something that God is calling us to do that is bigger than us. Something that we had never even imagined. And God is like, that is what I want to do. Just obey and walk by faith. What about you? What about you? What has God called you to do? Friends, we cannot live a kawaida life. We cannot live just to live a day at a time. You know that saying of a day at a time, or what will be, will be? That's not the walk of believers. That's not our walk. At what will be, will be. Nothing. Only what God says will be, will be. And if God says this year you are becoming 1, 2, 3, 4, you better believe it. And walk it and cancel that thought and that faith that what will be, will be. No, it's not what will be, will be. What the Lord says will be, will be. If it was what will be, then Abraham would just have stayed in Haran. And then after the father died, says, you know what, I don't know anything about Haran. Let me go back to Ur. But because God called him, God said, no, go this direction. He chose to follow what the Lord will do. Earlier I was to show you photos of 3 years ago when we started here as pastors of this church. This church has been there much, much longer. I don't know if you guys found the photos. But 3 years ago, let me say 4 years ago, my wife and I were in Joburg. We had started a church in Midrand. And, through COVID, the church struggled for a while. And because of, South Africa was affected. And so we closed the church for such a long time. And my wife, beginning of 2021, she was in prayer. And as she was praying, God showed her that she was in Nakuru. God showed her. God did not show me. So she came to me and told me, what if God is calling us to Nakuru? We've not had any conversation. In fact, we knew the pastor was here, his wife, his family. We knew them, okay? And she comes to me and says, oh, what if God is calling us to Nakuru? And I was like, Nakuru? the only Nakuru I knew was Kenyatta Avenue. Unajua hapo mali easy coach inasimama. That's the only place I knew of Nakuru because, of course, it was just a transit town for me in a bus. And anywhere I could stop, that's the only place I knew in Nakuru. So I told her, I don't think so. I was like, okay, continue praying. But in my heart of heart, I was like, Nakuru, I'm called for bigger things. So we started praying. And as we prayed, in I think April of that year, we're having just a call with our bishop, and we are talking. We're just having conversation. It's like, you guys have been faithful serving, and you've gone and you've done a wonderful job in SA, and I sense God has the next opportunity open, and He's calling you to something different now. And He says, I want you to pray. But I sense he's telling us now that God is calling you to Nakuru. And I looked at her, those of, kwani mlikuwa meongea? And friends, from that moment when he said that, I knew that was God calling us into the next season. So we started preparing to come back and to come to Nakuru. So I started researching about the church, started looking what's happening, what's going on, what is Nakuru about. That's what I do. I love research and just getting information. And I says that God was really calling us. And I started walking in the faith that God has called me to Nakuru and my family. And so we came. And I remember January. So I remember the first time I walked into the gates and thinking, wow, this is a beautiful space. And I was just like, God, I wonder what you want to do here. But I'm ready. I have said yes to the call. Now we've moved back from South Africa. Now we live here in Lanet. And we are just like, yeah, we are ready. We are ready for this. And God has done amazing things. In 3 years, it's beyond what we thought it would be. But even as we walk this journey, just like Abraham, we finish this chapter and God is like, here is another door. Now this is the direction you as a church need to walk. And as we grow closer to that, God is like, now this is the direction that I need you to walk. And I know that there are some of you who are here today, and maybe you are new, and you're testing this church. And you're like, I'm not sure. Well, I came to tell you this morning that the pastor here believes that God has called him to this city. For this point in time, we are giving our everything to this ministry, to this city, to this church. That was January of 2022 as a church. And I remember, I think that time we came and we were just like, wow, God is just about to do something amazing. At that time, we were meeting every Sunday, and I think we were like 90, 80 of us every Sunday, adults. And here we are today, seated 300 adults, and I'm just like, there is something bigger that God wants to do. So many lives have been changed. So many people have given their lives to Christ. So many destinies have been transformed because of this ministry. And it's because we believe that God has called us to it. That's why we are always here, pushing, thinking, dreaming, asking God, where next? And friends, this is your story. Because God has called you somewhere. God has an assignment for you as an individual. Has it for you as a family. And maybe some of you are already living in that space. But the question is it purposeful? Is it all it can ever be? Because it's possible that you're not living to the full potential. At your workplace, as you go in tomorrow morning, ask yourself, God, is this the place? Then what have you called me to do here? As the accountant in this company, what have you called me to do here? Because there has to be a purpose. You're not just called to crunch the numbers only. There has to be more that bring transformation in the people's lives. We want to claim the blessings of Abraham. Can we also accept the call of God over us? God is calling you this year to greater, to bigger things. The call is personal, the call is purposeful, and the call will transform you if you say yes to it. Your life will never be the same again. And I look at my life and I know it can never be the same again just by saying yes to the call of God. Can you say yes to the call of God this year? I don't know what that looks like. That's the beauty of it, because it's not mine to give. I have no idea what God is calling you to, but He knows, and He just wants you to say yes. Say yes to His call. And this morning, if you've never given your life to Christ, that's the first place we start with you. You say yes to Him. And then once you say yes to Him, the rest will follow. The rest will follow. He has the answers. He has the answers for us. Are you ordinary enough? Are you ordinary enough to receive the call of God? Let's bow down our heads in prayer at this time. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after Thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship Thee. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after Thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship You. You alone are my strength, my shield. To You alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship Thee. One more time, say You alone. You alone are my strength, my shield. To You alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship You. If you're here this morning and you've never given your life to Christ, this is the morning, the 12th of January 2025, that the Lord is calling you to say yes to Him. That is the first call that He is placing over you this morning. And the call is to you, for you to stop living on your own and to say, Jesus, I surrender my life to You. Guide me, lead me. If you're here this morning, I want to pray for you where you're seated. Just lift up your hand.